U.S. Federal Reserve Chief Jerome Powell's final press conference did not rock the boat.
But he and a majority of Fed policymakers erred a bit on the hawkish side given the lack of progress in the Gulf. So at this swan song meeting, as Fed boss Powell once again carried an anti-Trump crescendo. Well, the Fed held rates steady for the third consecutive meeting, despite President Trump's repeated rhetoric for deep rate cuts. But the 8-4 vote on Wednesday's meeting was the most divided decision since October 1992.
Today, the FOMC decided to leave our policy rate unchanged. We see the current stance of monetary policy as appropriate to promote progress toward our maximum employment and 2% inflation goals. Developments in the Middle East are contributing to a high level of uncertainty about the economic outlook, and we will remain attentive to risks to both sides of our dual mandate.
With Fed pick Kevin Warsh confirmed at a key Senate committee vote to become the next boss, Trump's desire for rate cuts could come true now. However, Warsh faces a tough inflation environment to ease rates. For Fed policymakers dissented on the pause in internet rate decision. That is the first time since 1992 when there have been so many policymakers voting against a common decision. The dissents went in opposite directions. Fed Dove Stephen Miran once again voted in favor of a 0.25% rate cut.
Now, on the other hand, Elizabeth Morgan Hammack, Neil Kashkari and Lori Logan objected to including easing bias in the statement. Lisa Cook was targeted by the Trump administration, aligned with the stance favored by Powell.
Policymakers were concerned that the Iran war developments were contributing to a high level of uncertainty. The statement specifically noted concern over increase in energy prices, with policymakers bracing for more inflation. On Wednesday, Trump rejected Iran's Hormuz offer, keeping the U.S. blockade in place.
Well, the historic energy shock due to the Iran war has led to higher fuel and airline prices. That is pushing U.S. inflation back towards 4%.
Inflation has moved up recently and is elevated relative to our 2% longer-run goal. Estimates based on the Consumer Price Index and other data indicate that total PCE prices rose 3.5% over the 12 months ending in March, boosted by the significant rise in global oil prices that has resulted from the conflict in the Middle East. Excluding the volatile food and energy categories, core PCE prices rose 3.2% over the 12 months ending in March.
Still, the Fed indicated the current rise in price pressures as a transitory supply shock rather than a demand-driven inflation spiral. Unlike the pandemic, supply disruptions are narrower now and household real incomes are already under pressure. So that reduces the second-round inflation effect risk. But poly market bets show that the Fed is no longer expected to cut interest rates in 2026. The odds of the Fed cutting rates this year fell to a new low of 44%.
And for more on this, our correspondent Susan Tehrani has sent us this report from New York. Take a look.
Well, the Justice Department recently dropped its criminal probe into Fed renovation costs. Jerome Powell says that the broader political pressure from President Trump and his administration threatens the Fed's independence, and he wants to stay on as a governor. Now, Powell can stay on as a governor until 2028, making it harder for the White House to reshape the Fed quickly, even with a new chair. Meanwhile, the U.S. Central Bank announced that it will not change the country's key lending rate for a third consecutive time. Susan Tehrani reporting from New York for WION World is One.